City Council of Ojai, it's my honor and pleasure to come before you for probably the first time in my life after being here at the Water District for almost 31 years to give a presentation on the status of water in our communities here locally in Western Ventura County. I'm very proud to be the General Manager of Casitas, not because of just the organization itself, but because of the community that formulated Casitas Municipal Water District in the early 50s. I can't tell you how fortunate we actually are with some of the decisions that were made in the early 50s to formulate the Ventura River Project to help assist our water supplies that we rely on and have counted on for our agriculture and for our way of life. And the people of the 50s that made that commitment should be commended forever for what they have done. So I'd just like to start with that as a thought and thinking about what else is going on in the state of California and what is going on with Lake Casitas, and that's going to be the premise of my presentation tonight. So I thank you for having me here. We'll see if this works. Do I point it at something? Okay.
Not working?
Not working yet.
There you go. Oop.
Almost. Try it again.
Let's go with backup.
Backup plan. Very good. Oh, there we kicked over a couple. Let me back up a little bit and see if it just delays.
I think it's delays.
Okay.
Think it's working?
Let's see if it goes back one more. At least.
This?
He's setting us up, I think, to start all over again.
Start us over, Jeremy. And then this, I'll try this first. Hold on.
Okay. All right.
I don't know, unless you want to run it, Jeremy. Are you running it? Am I? I guess I am. But now, start us again.
Space bar?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. It's probably a good thing they didn't have this technology in 1952, or we'd still be building that dam out there.
Technology does not always work. Okay, let's try it.
All right.
Sorry.
All right, here we go. Let's start with the California status. I was hoping we'd have another status this morning, but we all recognize and hear, if we've been listening to the news for the last 3-4 years, we're in the middle of a very serious drought in the state of California. It's having extreme impacts throughout the entire state, much like we've not seen in probably at least 3-4 decades. And right now we're in the middle of that. We're starting to feel a little rain. We're very hopeful that we'll see some windows opening up for rain to come into the state. But what is going on in the rest of the state has had extreme impact on the citizens of California. Extreme drought conditions right now, considered the third most severe drought, depleting reservoirs throughout the state. State Water Project initiated last year in March at a 0% release, first time in the history of the State Water Project since 1963. Fallowing of well over 400,000 acres of croplands in the Central Valley. Extreme loss of not only dollars for the agricultural community, but for the labor force that California supports. Statewide economic costs of approximately $2.2 billion and a shift from surface water to groundwater in the rest of the state. And I'll explain that later. We're a little bit different here in the Casitas Municipal Water District area. State's call to action. This past summer, the state of California mandated a reduction to occur. Didn't mandate, I guess, because I asked us to reduce urban water use by 20% statewide. Quite a bit of challenge regarding that to achieve that type of a reduction, but we're moving on that. They've also adopted the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act to address groundwater issues throughout the state, and we just recently had a vote on the state water bond, which is to begin work on many of the assets of our backbone water system in the Delta and the state water project. Bottom line right now that everybody is feeling is that the drought is likely to continue through 2015 regardless of El Nino conditions. We've had 4 extremely dry years. It's going to take a lot of rain and a lot of water to get us back into a condition where where the state is not impacted for drought. Depletions in groundwater basins are drastic at this point, and it is going to take probably several years of El Nino conditions to restore California to where it's not feeling the effects of a drought. Locally, this particular area of Ventura County, western Ventura County, is reliant on 100% of local water supplies. We're relying on our groundwater basins, and we're relying on Casitas Municipal Water District for our local water supplies. We're not connected to the state water project, even though we hold for this area, 5,000 acre-foot entitlement to the state water project. We do not have connecting pipelines to that project, and we're also looking at costs for that project escalating. The question is whether we would ever see any state water in this particular area. But totally relying on 100% water supply, which really makes this community and the surrounding communities needing to be responsible for their water use and diligent with their water use to make it last. This is just a diagram of Casitas Municipal Water District to give an idea of the boundaries of the district, reaching down into Ventura, up into the upper Ojai, almost to the snack bar up in the upper Ojai, surrounding Matilaha Reservoir, and going all the way out to the Santa Barbara County line. Also in that area we have groundwater basins that are Ventura River, Ojai, and upper Ojai basins, and we depend on the surface water Lake Casitas. Casitas and the Ventura River project and Casitas were formulated to provide water supply reliability for this community and the Ventura communities and other areas within this particular boundary area. The strife that they went through in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s drove the community to create the Ventura River project to provide some reliability to the groundwater sources that continually went dry during extreme droughts of those periods, those early 1900s. Casitas' service area, we have direct municipal and industrial and agricultural water service, and we also provide wholesale service to other water agencies to supplement their groundwater supplies when they do go dry. Local water status. Bring you up to date on where we're at. I'm not going to go into the details of where we're at on these because it tends to change with the 2 inches of rain we just enjoyed. There may have been a little bit of a rise in groundwater supply, but upper Ventura River essentially went dry last June. That caused some stress onto the Miners Oaks Water Company, Water District, with some of their well supplies. We saw them come over to us. Ojai Groundwater Basin is approaching historic levels of low. We'll see how that turns, whether we continue with the drought or we get some rainfall that will replenish the Ojai Groundwater Basin. The lower Ventura River, which essentially receives any outflow from Ojai Basin or the upper Ventura River, is seeing minimal flows. Quite frankly, flows like I've never seen in the last 30 years, including the 1990 issues that we got into. When we have those kinds of situations occurring, unlike what I suggested was happening in the rest of the state with drilling groundwater to supplement the surface water, in this particular area, we have a shift from groundwater supply to Lake Casitas supply. Right now, this is the status that we have for our major water companies of this area and their dependency on Casitas. Miners Oaks has been a 100%. That may have changed over the weekend. I haven't talked to them about that yet, but until this past weekend when we had the rainfall, we were at 100% providing them. It's very typical for this to occur during a drought period, and it gets back to why Casitas is here and the availability of water supply and groundwater supplies that are utilized first by these agencies, and also agriculture. Kind of relates back to Lake Casitas water demands that we see. Very variable. a typical, well, let's just say city of Ventura, or even here locally with the Golden State, usually we'll see a pretty constant water use. We don't see that. We have a lot of variability, and a lot of it's related to rainfall, because we're either having a heavy rainfall and the agriculture shuts off because of plentiful water for them. And likewise with the resale agencies that rely on their groundwater, they will shut us off and will be at a lower demand. But it begins to get dry, first, second, third year into that drought, we see that escalation. And that's what we see from 2010 to 2014 is that escalation. And we saw a similar escalation back in the 1987 through 1991 period until we had the March miracle that occurred, some of us do remember, and some of the other El Nino periods during the 1990s that really boosted water supplies. Well, we've been into that trend, and also the green line there is the agricultural demand. Very variable, dependent upon rainfall. If they can get 20 to 30 inches of rainfall, that's 20 to 30 inches they don't have to buy from Casitas to get their crops in good shape. So right now, Lake Casitas, current storage, we're at 51.8%. Just to let you know, and if you're one of those that look at the website, and I know there's one or at least one in this room, Russ, who does that on a daily basis. We didn't go to 44% overnight. We had a little problem with the gauge, but we're at 51.8% of capacity right now. Annual safe yield calculation, that's a theoretical yield, 20,840. That's another key number that we utilize, and being able to see that our water demands fluctuate around that number but don't go extensively beyond that number to where we begin to get into a problem with Lake Casitas capacity. Last December 1990 was the last time Lake Casitas declined to this stage. So we're starting to see the tree that you saw in the beginning and other things pop up that we haven't seen since 1990. May 2006 was the last time Lake Casitas was at full storage. I'm going to show you a chart here in a minute, but thinking about that's 8.5 years. Some of the planning that was done in 1952, it's remarkable how well they did, but I think a lot of it has to do with our demands being fairly consistent and not escalating as we had feared in 1990. We do, since 1992, we do have a water shortage contingency plan, and the goals are to conserve water for the greatest public benefit, mitigate effects of a water shortage, and allocate water so that we have water that is sustainable and reliable. The priorities for potable water: public safety, health, and sanitation. Interesting conversation statewide regarding that, particularly when there was 0% state water available. I heard a lot of rhetoric between ag and urban users as to who was going to take the hit and who was going to take the deficits. And it's a tough one. It is a very hard question to answer when you've got billions of dollars of crop that people depend upon, and you're talking about water and whether the people have the water to live otherwise, and making changes in what they use that water for. Economic sustainability of this area is very key and important. We do have a very viable agricultural community. I think, quite frankly, we all appreciate and acknowledge the agricultural community that we do live in. I did grow up in Simi Valley, and I did watch it change from what I used to be in the orange groves, the sun-kissed groves, to now what is streets. So I do appreciate what this place looks like and the protection that we do for this valley. Quality of life for the district customers. That's what I just was talking about. For me, this is good quality of life. I go back to Simi, and it's sad. But it's changed. It's the way that they've developed it. This is the chart I wanted to refer to on the safe yield. First of all, we've got that top red line. The top blue line actually is 100% capacity, lake full. The next red line with Casitas storage trend, that's where we have come from since 2005 to present, and almost touching that 50% level. The other darker red line is the model that we use to calculate safe yield using the 1944 through 1965 drought period. That, I think, is probably one of the key things that when they designed Lake Casitas, the size of it, they really considered a long period drought. I hear from others whether we should go to a 5-year or a 7-year drought. All that really does is allow you to move more water out, and you get into those dire strait situations much quicker. That's probably one of the things that really has been very well planned. And as you can see, except for the rains, we're performing very well, heading towards 50%. But I would like to point out, as far as the water shortage contingency plan, when we get to 50% and below, there's mechanisms to go into 20% mandatory reduction. And if we begin to go below that, we're looking at other reductions. You begin to get into that risk zone of how much do you get down to before you figure you're going to run out of gas or you're going to run out of water. So we've taken a look at that, and when we did our urban water management plan, the state required us to put in certain key kick points that we would turn to our water users and request that we get into some demand reductions. These are going to be some hard decisions if we get down into that lower stage, but I hear enough rhetoric right now seeing the lake at 52%. I can't imagine what the rhetoric is going to be like when we get down to 25% of storage. I think everybody's going to be concerned, much as they are up in Santa Barbara with Cachuma right now at about 28%. How much longer will it last for us is the question. Impacts at lower lake level. Interesting that we really haven't been below 50% since probably about 1967. So we really haven't operated the lake in that lower stretch, but we've learned a lot in the last 50 years about that lower stretch. It's a different type of area within the lake. We have to be concerned about dissolved oxygen, manganese, sulfur, those things that get into the lower parts of the lake. We're going to be installing this year through some grant funding a new aeration system to improve that water. So we're looking at things if we do transition in that lower 50%, we want to be ahead of that curve to make sure that we can make that the best water to select to deliver to the public and not be behind it with serving water that is unpalatable, quite frankly. This is an old picture from 1959 of minimum pool and what it looks like in a minimum pool and the intake structure at Casitas Dam. And that was another interesting thing that was put in was 9 intake gates. So we can go in and basically select the water that is the best to deliver throughout that whole lake. Well, now we're down to 5 intake gates instead of the 9. So our selectivity gets a little bit smaller, and so we have to work with that. Other part is water quality as the lake goes down. Algae control and taste and odor is always a battle that we're challenged with in Lake Casitas. It may intensify, and we need to be on the forefront of that. We feel this aeration system also will help that particular situation. We get algae blooms, gets into filtration plant performance, the algae gets on the filters and water doesn't pass through as quickly. So we're looking at lake aeration to improve that. We already have a lake aeration system. This is going to be a different one, kind of bringing in the heavy muscle on the aeration system. This is an area that I really want to just take a few minutes about, because this is one I feel the best about, and that's our local drought response. There's been a lot of efforts by the water agencies to put out the word, but the response is really where I feel that this community hears us. Urban water use. We took a look. We're required to meet the 20% reduction from last year, 2013 to 2014. When we just did the numbers for November, our direct urban water use is down 24%. I think I'm hearing from other agencies those types of numbers, and I think the public is understanding. I was at the booth at Ojai Day, and I can't tell you how many people enjoyed coming up to us talking about what they were doing to conserve water. That's what we really want to hear from the locals, and I really feel good about the people and their effort in this area to do what they feel really should be done. Institutional water use, schools. We've had some corrective actions that were done by schools. I remember going to Matilaha on a Sunday to play soccer. My son played soccer, and it was basically a marsh. I think that that's changed. I remember in 2003 when Nordoff High School put in their new baseball and football fields. The water would run off into the Ojai Land Conservancy and started a whole new water marsh over there. And we took a look at it, and my goodness, the water was just being hammered out there. Put in some irrigation timers, significant savings of money and water that then came out of that. I want to say it was about $25,000 a year that we saved in water that then get put back into the classroom, back into the school district. And I hope with the bonds and the improvements that they're looking forward to at the Ojai Unified School District, they'll follow through with some of these improvements and realize what they need to do to help themselves save that water, save that money, and do the right thing. So I'm looking forward to that and that opportunity. Quite coincidental, golf courses. They've taken a couple of hits at a couple of meetings, but I want to say, you know, Ojai Valley Inn, I remember working with Mr. Williamson back in the 80s to put in he was putting in a state-of-the-art irrigation system. These guys care about their water use. It's business, it's money. Ojai Valley Inn just this past summer approached us with some different ideas. They're once again spending a couple $1 million on improving their irrigation system and also reducing the amount of turf area that they have within their course. They hear it ahead of time. They're moving. They have really moved forward. Likewise, Soul Golf Course has done a very good job at conserving water and utilizing their wells when they can and doing the right things. So we're seeing some good things. Individual responses. I'm going to mention this because I know him personally, but I don't think there's any town in this country that has an individual like Cody Creighton that stood up as a youth and made a statement. And his statement is very interesting. It's you can do certain things if you really put your mind to it. Never mind not having a shower for 128 days. The gentleman, he did it correctly. He did it right. He didn't do it in a way that resulted in a health issue. But he sent a message out that the youth of America, you guys can do these things and make a difference. Agricultural responses. We're really in a good place with agriculture, and that they started a lot of their actions back in the 80s. And I think that they've gone through different changes to make sure that they're doing the right things with their irrigation. Our agricultural people in this valley ought to be applauded for the foresight and the efforts that they put forward to making significant changes in their irrigation systems. And to them, that water is costly. It's more costly than it was back in 1984, 85. It means business. It means dollars in their pockets. And they're doing the things they need to do to keep that agriculture viable in Ojai. So I can't say enough about the agricultural community that we have here in Ojai. Other thing I want to just report on, it was kind of, oh no, were we going to really do this? We put out a water waste reporting, and we were concerned about whether we would get swamped. I had one agency that received on the first day over 1,000 calls about water wasting, and I thought, uh-oh, we were going to be into it. I think in the first month of it, we received about 70 calls, and some of those were for other water agencies. We coordinated with that. But the nice thing is we got good correction and cooperation by the public to get those taken care of. We haven't issued any fines to anybody regarding this for second or third offenses. People are hearing the message and getting it done. So I think, as a community, we've done a lot. We may have to do a lot more, quite frankly, if the drought continues and the lake continues to go down. But I see the will and the way to do it, and I see a lot of people contributing towards it. So that's a good sign for the community within the Casitas Municipal Water District. I'm open for any questions that you have.
Does anybody have any questions for Steve?
I have a quick question.
Sure, Bill.
When we get into if the worst happens and it doesn't start raining, we think it's going to, but if it does in fact continue the way, and you get into those lower protocols, below 50%, you mentioned there is some sale of wholesale water outside the system to other agencies that have other connections, other sources of water. What is the priority as it goes into the lower and lower levels of lake when you start choosing between exporting water, essentially, and having water kept for users in the valley?
Well, let me answer your one question.
Okay.
exporting of water is not something that we want to continue or are interested in. So that's one key issue that we're trying to put a stop to. The other part is that when we talk about the other agencies, we're talking about Miners Oaks, Ventura River, and there's probably 6 other water agencies. They're all part of this community. They all have people in it. And the real issue that we've all came to the table and talked about is sharing that load, that if their groundwater tables are down and they're on Casitas, they are participating in what everybody else in Casitas District is doing. And we...
And I wasn't thinking of those agencies. I was thinking some of the interconnections with Ventura City.
That has been a problem that we hope to solve here very soon. Yes.
Anybody else have any further questions?
I had a couple, Steve.
Sure, Randy.
We're talking potable here. Has anyone started talking about affluent?
Yeah, I think you're going to hear from Jeff, maybe. Jeff Jeff will talked about reclaim, for instance.
Right.
Right. One of the things that's there is that, maybe Jeff, I'll let you talk about that. Jeff's loaded for bear on that one, okay?
Well, I mean in a good way. I understand the city of San Diego's looking at using it, and I've had some experience with the city of Los Angeles regarding it. And I was just wondering what our thoughts are on this community regarding, the mixing or just the using of that type of water.
Well, I think one of the main things that, Jeff, I'll go ahead and step on your toes a little bit on this, history-wise. Little history on the Ojai sand plant. It's put on a piece of property that actually belongs to the city of Ventura, and the city of Ventura, in their agreement, has first call on be able to get that particular water for reclaim purposes. The other issue is that there is out there is that at times like this right now, that 2 CFS they put out is probably the only water in that lower stretch of Ventura River. So you have steelhead habitat concerns. The other key issue is just the location where the sanitation plant is placed and where's the best use of that particular water. It may be with the city of Ventura, it may be with oil companies, it may be actually with wildlife habitat. So those are, I'm a recycle guy too. I cut my teeth on wastewater, and I believe that has tremendous opportunity in a lot of cities. And I think City of Ventura right now is looking hard and heavy at their McGrath Beach sanitation plant too. A lot of opportunity there.
Well, and then the state water bond is am I saying that right?
Sure.
And are we expected to contribute to that?
Right now, if we sign it, yeah, I think that's...
And so my question would be, what do we get for it?
Well, that's a good question, and I think those are things that we're trying to work out here in the near future. We're just beginning negotiations on the state water bond next week regarding public hearings and where we're going to be, but we do have that entitlement, and what we're looking at is the questions that we've always raised. Do we sell it, or do we temporarily transfer it? There's opportunities out there to do different things with it, and to try to lessen the burden that we have on our taxpayers for paying for state water project. When we do transfer it to other agencies and we get money in for that one-year transfer in a pool, we take that and we reduce the tax roll that we would otherwise put out there. That's where that money goes. So there may be some opportunities to make some transfers to some areas that are in need of water.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions for Mr. Wickstrum? Well, I appreciate you coming and giving a thorough presentation, and I'm sure if anybody else has a question, you could get a hold of Mr. Wickstrum.
I'm usually there, yeah.
Yes. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Second presentation is from the Ojai Sanitary Sewer District. Mr. Palmer.
Mayor and new members of the council, I'm happy to be here. I've got a little show and tell. I'm going to hand this out first. So I wanted to bring that as a show and tell to you. We're doing some rehab work right now on Shady Lane. Shady Lane is an area where historically there is high groundwater, and when there is groundwater, it actually leaks into laterals and main lines and manholes and makes its way out of town. I like to call it a free taxi ride to the treatment plant. So what you have before you there is the flexible sock is something that is you mix with an epoxy glue and you put it down the sewer lateral, the sewer main. You then inflate it with air pressure or steam, and it cures to the hardened piece of material, thereby making sure that there are no more leaks and cracks in the laterals or the main line. So we're doing some work right now on Shady Lane to test out the technology. It's working very well, but we'll have some more results maybe later in the year. I want to talk a little bit about what we call inflow and infiltration, I&I. It's a big topic in the sewer world. When it rains, we get extra water in our sewer system. Right now we treat about 1.5 million gallons a day. Anybody above Orchard down on the Ventura Avenue that's connected to the sewer is connected to us. And in high flow periods when it rains, we get extra water. In March of 2011, we peaked at 9 million gallons a day. So we got an extra 7.5 million gallons of rainwater that got into our system, that gets a free taxi ride out of town, that gets treated nicely for the fish in the ocean, but it's 7.5 million gallons of water that gets out of town. The rainstorm that hit on December 2nd, just here 2 weeks ago, within a half an hour of rain starting, we saw flows increase at the treatment plant over 1,000 gallons a minute. So I would implore people as we talk about water and the lake and groundwater that if your downspouts are connected to the sewer system, please disconnect them. Save that water for your lawn, for your trees, for the aquifer, and for the rivers and creeks rather than sending it to the treatment plant. We're happy to treat it, but it's kind of a problem in the long term. We also did some smoke testing today. We fixed the 34 laterals on Shady Lane, and on the rainstorm of the 2nd of December, we saw rain increase our flows on Shady Lane. Well, the only piece of street that discharges to Shady Lane is Mercer Lane. So we went out today and put some smoke generators, good old-fashioned smoke bombs. They're not bombs, they're just non-toxic smoke, and we put them down in the sewer system and watch where the smoke comes up. About 25% of the homes didn't have any smoke coming out of the vents in their house. Normally the smoke goes down in the main line, goes up the laterals, goes up the vents, and comes out nicely right through the vents out onto your roof, and that's the way it's supposed to work. Well, about 25% of the homes had no smoke coming up through the vents. So either A, the lateral's blocked by roots and cracks, B, there's a sag in the line and the smoke can't get through the water, or the vents are plugged with leaves and acorns and all kinds of things. So we're going to do some follow-up testing, but the fact remains that Mercer feeds into Shady Lane. The flow's increased on Shady Lane, so we know there's extra water coming from Mercer. We know there's water coming from every part of town. So if you have downspouts, yard drains, whatever you have connected, please disconnect them. It's better for all of us. It's better for the environment for that water to stay in the yards and the aquifers rather than going to the lower river. Steve talked a little bit about the treatment plant and some of the issues that revolve around the water that comes out of the treatment plant. When the treatment plant was built in the 1960s, the Sanitary District signed a 99-year lease with the city of Ventura. $1 a year, built the treatment plant, and it's been functioning very nicely for the past 50 years. Well, for the next 50 years, we're still under the terms of that lease. That lease gives the city of Ventura first right of refusal to the water that comes out of that treatment plant. Doesn't mean they can just take it. They have to follow CEQA. They have to follow all kinds of regulations to use that water. But we can't, as OVSD, the Sanitary District, just take that water without at least going through a process. The second constraint to using that water is of course, steelhead and ecosystem. Right now, today, the water in the river but below the treatment plant is only coming from the treatment plant. So the fish, the birds, the ecosystem, the recharge of groundwater, and the estuary are only getting fed by the treatment plant. So if you could overcome those two constraints, the lease and the fish, then you got to deal with how to get the water from down there back up here. That's a very, very expensive pipeline and a very, very expensive pumping system. Doesn't mean it's not impossible, doesn't mean we shouldn't think about it as a community resource, but it has some serious constraints. So it's not just as easy as go down there and get it and it's a free source of water. But it sure is something that in the water world we've already talked about, thinking outside the box and how to do things differently, but it definitely has some constraints to it. One of the biggest issues that we're facing as a sanitary district is something that you as a city are also facing, and that is the issue of nutrients in the river. Recently, the Regional Water Quality Control Board and the EPA has passed some rules basically requiring all of us, horse owners, septic tanks, the treatment plant, to cut the discharge of nutrients in half that go into the river. So nitrogen and phosphorus that generate algae, the algae causes dissolved oxygen to be reduced, the fish suffer. It's sort of a very simple cycle, but the overall program is to reduce the nutrients. We've been working very hard on trying to do that. The treatment plant and the people of this community have been doing wonderful work for the past 50 years since the Clean Water Act was passed. The water coming out of the treatment plant today is probably 95% cleaner than it was in the mid-70s. It's a well-run plant, it's state-of-the-art technology, but thank you for doing a good job. The EPA wants us to cut it in half again. So we're facing that issue on the water that comes out of the treatment plant. Our community is also facing that for water that comes out of our storm drains. So it's something that's a significant challenge. We're working through those issues, and it's going to take some time. We have until 2025 to meet the new discharge requirements, but it's going to take us quite a while to meet those goals. So that's kind of a highlight of what we're doing up on Shady Lane, some I&I issues, some nutrient issues. Steve and I talk quite a bit about water and what we can all do. We're all one valley. The water we generate comes from this valley. The water we use, it's just us. And anything we can do to use it wisely and do it better is what we're working on. But I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Palmer?
I have one quick one. Mr. Palmer, I love what I know of what you've been doing. The sanitary district and sanitary on the Shady Lane is, I think, just a great project because you're investigating, you're getting facts, you're using those facts to do further investigation, all the right ways to do it. Do you have a timetable for you think you might be done with that pilot project and have some sense of costs, average costs, those kinds of economic issues that are, be part of the further decision making?
We've finished the construction. We're actually having a final sort of contract billing meeting tomorrow. I hope to have before the end of the year sort of a summary of what we did and how we did it. I'll say many parts of our town are 100 years old, almost 100 years old when it comes to the sewer system. No matter how well the materials were installed and how good they were back then, it's showing its age. And laterals and cracks and roots and joints are all becoming looser, and those are things we need to solve. So hopefully by the end of the year we'll have some answers. That will help us determine what we need to do on the main lines. It will also give us some options on how to deal with some of the things, that the private lateral questions. And we were able to do most of the work completely robotically without having to dig up the streets or the front yards. So there's some great technology, and hopefully we'll have some more answers.
Anyone else on the council? Yes, Councilmember Haney.
Again, when I heard that we're losing how many hundreds of thousands of gallons every time it rains?
Well, in a week ago's storm on December 2nd, we were up 1,000 gallons a minute in a half an hour.
Right. So I know we can't, it sounds like we can't do anything once the water reaches the treatment plant. So it sounds like we've got to do something before that.
Absolutely.
And we always talk about homeowners that we can do water catchment basins or stormwater collection devices. It sounds like we need to think outside of the box, and we need to figure out how to pick up on some of that water or collect some of that water prior to the sanitation before it reaches your site. And
us civil engineers, we were really good at figuring out how to catch the water and get it out into the gutter and into the pipes and get it out of town really quickly. And you know, ever since the time of the Romans, we've been trying to do that. And all of a sudden, we figured out that maybe that's not the best way to do things. Maybe we ought to catch the water off our downspouts, put it on our yard, let it soak into our yard, never get into the gutter, never get into the streets, never get, you know, just quick out of the concrete. So, you know, everything that we can each do to be more sustainable in the water that comes onto our lots or our driveways or our parking lots or our roofs, those are all really wonderful things. The more water we keep here, the slower it seeps into San Antonio Creek, the longer the creek flows, the more water stays in the aquifer. I mean, it's that old slow it down, stop it, sink it into the ground kind of conversation. And I think it's something that we have to embrace. You know, Steve says we're 100% locally dependent upon the water that falls here. Let's try and keep as much as we can.
Anybody else? I just want to make a couple comments. It's interesting. Is there does your website specify how you would know if your drain pipe is connected to sewer line?
No. One of the things we're looking at up on Mercer is there are several locations where you can walk down the street, you can look at a house, you can see the downspouts, you can see the downspout coming down and going into a pipe right into the ground. That downspout should be turned and just discharging right into the lawn, into the planters, into the flowers. That's just, you know, it gets the water off your yard quick, which keeps puddles and things from happening. I understand that. But in the long term, from an ecosystem environmental perspective, you know, everything we can keep on your lot and let sink into the ground, the better off we are.
And definitely, and I think that your agency is obviously being proactive, and it seems like a lot of the service area is in the city also. And I'm assuming that the system you're talking about throughout the city itself. So I think it's important for us to be working together, and I hope that we could continue that to help resolve some of these issues, because if we're talking about water and drought and everything, it's important for us to get educated, and as a city, I think it's important for us to provide that information to our citizens.
And anytime you would like us to come, I'm sure Steve and I are more than willing to come talk to you, to the Planning Commission, to groups, to whatever we can collectively do to share the information we have. You know, we have some good technology and cameras and meters and all kinds of things that do measure the flow that just disappears when you turn on your sink. You know, we can tell you where it goes and how best to maybe slow it down and reuse it. And we'll be happy to come anytime you
Yeah,
need
and
us.
definitely, if you'd be open for another presentation just on that, just so that we know, what I'm getting at is preventing if there's a simple way to know that you're connected to sewer line, let's do it that way, and let's take that approach other than using probably the expensive robotics to figure out that you're not connected. So I mean, I'm interested in to see exactly what else we could do to help the sanitary district. So,
Well, you know, we have. I was at a business this afternoon, and I was doing an inspection, and I looked in the patio, and there was a drain. And I said, "Where does that go?" And the person said, "I don't know." Well, the building's been there since the 60s, so of course people wouldn't know where it goes today. But we have the ability to put some dye, non-toxic dye, into that drain, you know, put a hose on it, go pop a manhole down the street, and see if the dye shows up. So there are ways to smoke test and dye and do some simple things to try and figure out, hey, maybe if we just redid the landscaping around that drain, no longer would that water collect and just, you know, dump right into the sewer system. So, you know, it's the old you can't eat the elephant in one bite, but we got to start finding each one of these little problems. We don't have 1,000 gallon a minute one pipe problem. We've got 1,000 little pinhole leaks, and we got to just keep finding them. And if you find them, we'll be happy to show up, use our dye, use our technology, or work with whoever to help solve the problem.
thank you, appreciate it. And I know we do have a liaison to the sanitary district, so I hope that we
Sure.
could take advantage of that. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Palmer. Moving on to our third presentation, our recognition to public hearing section on the moratorium on the issuance of private well permitting. Moratorium on the issuance of the private water well permits. Staff report.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and members of the City Council. On October 28th, the Ventura County Supervisors adopted a water well permit moratorium that's an ongoing moratorium until such time as the groundwater basins file what are known as sustainability plans under the new laws that govern sustainability of water basins. At the same time, we adopted an ordinance, an urgency ordinance that mirrors that, but ours had a 45-day initial period, which is expiring, and now we have the opportunity to extend it for up to 10.5 months. Although this is partly engendered by the drought, it's really much more engendered by a paradigm shift that this law has created. In the past, we've always looked at water as being something that you can have if it's below your property, and that it wasn't really strongly regulated. But the Sustainability Act adopted by the state sets forth a new regulatory process that's a local regulatory process within the basins, but it's geared towards making sure that the basins are managed in a sustainable way. And as part of that process, a sustainability agency has to be designated for each basin. We're way ahead of the game because we have OBGMA, who will be and has already applied to be our sustainability agency. The next thing that has to happen is that sustainability agency has to develop a sustainability plan. And the law gives them a whole range of tools to use within that plan to make sure that our water basin is managed in a proper way, a sustainable way. So the moratorium is really a timeout to stop new wells from being developed while they go through the process of putting together the sustainability plan. It doesn't prohibit repair and maintenance and replacement in kind of existing wells, but it stops permits for new wells. We did discuss this. We brought this at the council's request to the OBGMA Board of Directors last week, and they unanimously recommended that the City Council extend the moratorium while they proceed forward with the development of the sustainability plan.
Thank you. Just before I ask if there's any comments and questions, I did take it upon myself to meet with some board members of OBGMA and talk a little bit more about what they've been doing and so forth. And I think I made some comments in the previous council meeting, which I thought that there wasn't enough studies and reports and data. And I was quickly corrected, and I feel really confident in their due diligence about actually being ahead of the game and providing reports. And I really, it was good information for me to hear. So I just want to make sure that I correct those comments and I make it clear to the public that they have been doing their work and gone beyond state requirement. And does any council member have any questions?
Mr. Mayor, yes, the OBGMA is really ahead of the game on this matter, and also at our last meeting, where I'm the one of the directors, we have established a subcommittee with Jordan Kerr, our hydrologist, Russ Baggerly, and myself to proceed with creating the final steps to become a sustainable organization. There's a few steps, which I think Mr. Baggerly is here in the audience, and he might be able to give us a real quick synopsis on how that he believes that's going to proceed, how long he think it may take, and really how close we are to it. I think that would be really an important thing for him to explain if he's willing to do so. Are you, Mr. Baggerly?
I'm here.
Oh, excellent.
Does anybody have any further questions before we have Mr. Baggerly come up?
Before I forget, typo alert, page 4 of 6, where it's on the bottom of section 6, it says, except as provided in section 6 below. I think that's supposed to be 7. just to make sure we're accurate. Is that correct?
Where are you again, Bill?
At the top of page 4 of the resolution, I believe the 6 is supposed to be a 7 in the first section, at the bottom of section, the top section.
Says temporary moratorium.
And it
section
refers
Oh, I
to
see
section
where you're
6.
looking.
I think that's supposed to be section 7.
Thank you.
I know it's picky, but we want to be accurate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any questions? Yes, Councilman Haney?
I guess my concern on the moratorium is, we're gonna stop the citizens of Ojai from developing any wells on their site. I'm sorry, I thought I turned it on. We're gonna put a moratorium on wells within the city boundaries of Ojai, correct? Are we preventing any other users of our aquifer? And I believe that's the reason we're doing the moratorium. Are we stopping any new meters being placed within the city from other agencies, whether it's Casitas, whether it's Ventura River? I mean, I guess my concern is we're selecting a group of people that say we don't want you to put any more wells in and we don't want you to tap into our aquifer, but we also have another group of citizens that still have that ability. So that's my only concern in this, is that I kind of see not necessarily a double standard, but that is a concern of mine, is the well users aren't the only ones tapping into that aquifer. That's one of my concerns about this. That's all.
Anybody else? No? If I'm going to open, or should we get first a report from Mr. Baggerly about what the...
Yes, and Supervisor Bennett's here as well. I think it might be a really good idea to have both of them speak as well, and then
we'll open
they
it
may
to
answer a
public.
lot of questions for people in the audience, or bring up questions for the people in the audience. So maybe it would be good for them to speak first.
Okay. Mr. Baggerly, if you...
I'll defer to.
Okay, Supervisor, if Supervisor Bennett.
I'm here specifically just to answer questions, so I think your city manager, Mr. Clark, very accurately summarized what the intent is, and that is to call a timeout. It is difficult to try to come up with a sustainability plan if at the same time you have a moving target of more wells going in. And so countywide, while things are different and maybe not in as bad a shape in the Ojai Basin here, certainly we have a dry basin in the upper Ventura River, for example, also a basin that will have to come up with a sustainability plan. They don't have an agency even at this point in time. And so whenever a regulatory agency is getting ready to adopt regulations, you have the potential for a rush of new wells in this situation to try to beat those regulations. So while these agencies are trying to put their plans together, it feels like it's good government to call a temporary timeout, not forever, but just until the plans get put together. It is a very common practice that cities do when they're getting ready to say, hey, we want to revise our plans for mobile home parks, or we want to revise our plans for group homes, or whatever. They say, hey, let's just stop everything so that you don't have a bunch of people rush in if you're saying, hey, we're getting ready to do these plans and they don't want to meet those requirements. Specifically to try to answer Councilmember Haney's question, I would offer there's a complete difference between somebody hooking up to Casitas water, which is not going to be regulated by these groundwater sustainability agencies. What's going to be regulated by a groundwater sustainability agency is the amount of pumping from the groundwater. Now, you don't, and the Board of Supervisors does not have the ability to say all of the current users for example, can't take any more water. We just don't have that ability. If we did, that might be an appropriate timeout also to say, hey, they can take what they're taking, but they can't expand their use. We just don't have that. But we do, the one thing we do have the ability to do is we are well permit agencies, essentially. The city of Ojai gets to decide what the standards are for new wells in Ojai. The county of Ventura gets to decide what the standards are for new wells in the county of Ventura. So that's the one area where we have the ability to help these agencies call a timeout for the specific issue of how many wells are going to be placed in a basin that might be close to overdraft. Let's just say a basin. The Upper Ventura River Basin certainly went dry in June. There is an overdraft issue there, or you could certainly make the case that there is. We might be right at sustainability with the Ojai Basin. We're probably fairly close, and that needs to be studied. And should we have some wells going in while they're completing that final look and trying to make that determination, some wells going in that would have no regulations on the amount of pumping that they could do, and then have to deal with the complications of saying, well, we were right even, except these new wells came in, and those new wells came in and maybe pumped at a high level to try to establish historical use or whatever. So I think there's a significant difference between saying some people are being treated, some people are being disadvantaged while other people are not. It is true. Anybody who's thinking of sinking a well is affected by this, but that is because that is what we have the ability to do to help the agencies. Whether you put a moratorium on water hookups altogether, there's another conversation that you could have, but that's not tied to that might be tied to the drought, but that wouldn't be tied to a sustainability agency that is trying to decide how many wells to allow in or how much water should be pumped from each particular well. What is that number? What's the magic number? And then how much does this well get, that well get, that well get, to try to make sure we don't exceed that number. At some point in time, all agencies will have those regulations where they'll identify what the limit is. And so this is about the new state law on that. A water hookup moratorium, legitimate issue for you to discuss, would be associated more with, we have a drought, we don't think we have enough water at this point in time. So I hope that helps in terms of the distinction between the difference. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions for Supervisor Bennett?
Well, it does. I believe what I'd like to do is probably to set up a meeting, just come to your office and talk to you a little more in depth about this. Again, my concern is someone like Golden State Water District that already has active wells, that is already taking water from our aquifer and has the ability to set meters on developed parcels in our community. What's the difference between them taking water out of an existing well and sending it to a new meter versus someone putting in a new well to, which technically is a metered source of water? That's all, I guess that's my concern. So I'd love to have this conversation with you.
Okay, good. And I'll give you a quick answer, but I'll be happy to have the conversation with you. And that is, there's no difference between that and a strawberry farmer down on the Oxnard Plain who has an existing well who says, I want to pump more out of that well. That strawberry farmer also has the right to do it. Maybe that strawberry farmer says, maybe somebody wants to go from a crop that only used 2 acre-feet of water per acre, and now they're going to go to a crop that's 4 acre-feet of water. They still have the right to do that. We simply don't have, those sustainability agencies have the right to tell them, no, you can't go to that more water-intensive crop. You as the city council and we as the board of supervisors don't have that ability to do that. Like I said, if we did, that would be a very legitimate thing for us to do it. We simply don't have the ability to do it. So you have the ability to say they can't put in a new well, but you don't have an ability to say any of the existing well users don't have the ability to expand their production. We don't have that ability at that point in time. If we did, it would be legitimate. But we don't, when I say the city council, the sustainability agency will have that authority. and a timeout, at least you're stopping new wells from coming in. They're going to have the complication potentially of the existing wells pumping more, but at least you don't have the existing wells pumping more and new wells coming in at the same time. But I appreciate your observation about that, and that's not an inaccurate observation, but I'd be happy to talk with you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Any more questions for Supervisor Bennett? No? Mr. Baggerly?
Thank you. My name is Russ Baggerly, and I'm a director with Casitas Municipal Water District for District 5 for most of the Ojai Valley. And because of the state legislature's enactment for establishing the Ojai Basin Groundwater Management Agency in 1991, the board of directors, the director from Division 5 is mandated to be on the board of directors for the OBGMA. So that's why I'm here. I wear two hats. Well, I've got a number of hats, but I won't go into all of that. Let me say, I'm going to say something a little somber before I get into what you want to hear. The entire workforce of Casitas is currently struggling through extreme grief because we've lost one of our own. Our hearts are really laden with sadness because we miss Mike Werber. He was our friend, our co-worker, and an integral part of our lives. But we still have to get the work done, so here we are at another meeting. But I'll tell you that the people at Casitas are down because of that issue. Now we'll get on to OBGMA. OBGMA last week passed a resolution stating that it does indeed want to be the exclusive agency that is going to be the groundwater sustainability agency for the Ojai Basin. That's written into the law. SB 1138 says there are 16 of like management agencies throughout the state. OBGMA is one of those. The Ojai Basin is one of those that has the state legislature behind it. It's part of state law. We have a number of the powers that exist in the new legislation already. We don't use them with an iron fist. We do it to make sure that we have cooperation with people who believe that they have an absolute right to pump as much water out of their groundwater overlying their well that they'd like. That, of course, is a total misrepresentation of groundwater law. In the Ojai Basin, let's use it as the example. You have the right to drill a well, absolutely, and it's ministerial for the most part. In fact, you can't really deny somebody the right to get a permit and drill a well. You can just help them put it in the right place so that the cone of depression doesn't impinge upon somebody else's well, or that collectively you do not draw too much out of the aquifer that causes the aquifer problems like subsidence or bad water quality. That's what the agency is there for, to make sure that we maintain the health of the basin at all times. I know it's always been said that you can't manage what you can't measure. Well, we've been measuring it for many, many years, for 20 years. We know the dynamics of the Ojai Basin. We won a grant for $219,000 from the local groundwater assistance agency within the Department of Water Resources to do a groundwater map model. With that model, we now know probably 100 times more about the basin than we did when the first model was done by John Turner in about 1972. We've grown a lot. We know what's going on with the basin. Mr. Haney, we haven't met before. Hi, I'm Russ Baggerly. Glad to meet you. We can't say that anymore, right? So now we know each other. You don't really, you shouldn't worry about what's going to happen with this moratorium because it doesn't last forever. People will still have the right to drill wells one day. And I am telling you that the Ojai Basin Groundwater Management Agency is working very diligently to make sure that it is your groundwater sustainability agency according to the new law. And we've already started thinking about how to comply with the mandate to come up with a groundwater management plan. We have done much of that work already. We don't think it will take us too long to complete our plan and send it to the Department of Water Resources. And as soon as we turn it in, we can tell your city manager that he can drop the moratorium. It may not be approved immediately by the Department of Water Resources, but if we develop the plan, it's our law. It's going to be by ordinance. So we can enforce what we think is absolutely right for the basin. Okay? So as soon as we get ours done, we'll call Rob and say, you can pull it. Okay?
Well, thank you, Mr. Baggerly. Does anybody have questions?
I'd
Yes,
just like to
Councilmember
amplify,
Weirick.
I really think that's a very salient point, that what this really is a tool to help OBGMA get their plan done, probably one of the first in the state to be submitted. I think I heard you say you're hoping.
I'm sure it will be.
You're looking for it. And so it's like I think it's very salient. It's an important partnership. I view this, it has a trigger for the moratorium to go away. I don't like indefinite moratoriums of any kind. This is not that. It has a trigger. It's a policy partnership with OBGMA, and I think it's well crafted.
According to state law, you cannot have an indefinite moratorium.
Right.
They are temporary.
Right. And this has a very clear incentive, really. Built into this is an incentive for OBGMA to accomplish.
Well, we
its
want
task as
to
soon as
make sure
possible.
that the health of the basin remains stable
And I
and
think that's-
sustainable.
So I think that's why I think that's a really important point.
Just one other thing. This is a public policy issue. This is not punitive. This is not saying no to everybody who ever wants to drill a well. It's just going to take 3 or 4 months, maybe 5. I don't know. I sent out an outline of what I thought we needed to do, and we're going to get busy on it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Baggerly. Any other questions before I open it up to the public? No? Our first speaker card is Bill O'Brien.
Good evening. Honorable Mayor, members of the council, and guests. My name is Bill O'Brien. I'm a local water resources engineer and also a member of the Ojai Valley Green Coalition, and I'm here tonight to speak for them. The Green Coalition is actively working on environmental sustainability, and obviously resource sustainability goes with that. We're sad we get to the point, we've had good years we didn't need to talk about moratoriums, but now we're here. And I think that's part of a predictable tragedy. It's been called the tragedy of the commons. Unlimited access to a natural resource in which everybody can use the resource, but no one is responsible to manage it. Well, fortunately, we have the guys in the white hats, I call them OBGMA. They've been working on this for the last 20 years. So the basin underneath us has been fortunate that people are thinking of the responsibility of managing a common resource. And the details have been well hammered out here. I think the moratorium is temporary. That's a good kind of a management tool to use this time. There's other places that have had these groundwater issues come up. They call them a run to the pump house when some of these rules come in, or another way to describe it is, so in summary, the Green Coalition really supports this moratorium as a temporary measure, and we think the energy should really be focused on developing the GSA, and I hope you put your best people on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Second speaker, Pat McPherson.
Hi, Pat McPherson, and welcome to all of you new people, and welcome back, Paul and Betsy and Severo. What I'm going to bring up tonight, and first I want to make it very clear, I'm speaking for Pat McPherson. I have experience. I've been on the board of a mutual water company. I know about water. I know the value of wells. And I've also been involved in getting Measure V passed. The situation that we have today, and by the way, I also want to say that Supervisor Bennett, I have great respect for him. I've always supported him. So this is not a personal issue that I'm bringing up. But what we have is a situation where we have a monopoly water company that is ripping off this community. We're not talking about Oxnard. We're not talking about anybody but Ojai. That rip-off company supplies Ojai, probably 90% of Ojai, its water. Those people can issue new hookups, as Councilman Haney said, and they can do that at will. All we're talking about here is saying any of those Golden State customers, we're going to lock you in. We're going to force you to continue to buy your water from Golden State because we put a moratorium and you cannot put in a well. That's all we're talking about here. We're only talking about the people that are served by Golden State. So when you're putting a moratorium, you are forcing those people to buy their water from Golden State. You are encouraging that monopoly, and you're giving the citizens no out. You're taking away the last out they had. Not that they did it, but now they have no out at all. And so I understand you're using this, and you're saying, oh, this is an opportunity to get the OBGMA to get off their butt. Well, why don't we just let them get off their butt? Because maybe if you really look at the OBGMA, who's on there? They're all pumpers. They all have a stake in the game right now. There really is no motivation for them to solve the problem. I'm not saying they're not going to, but I'm saying is the people that need it or that would want the wells are the ones that don't want to get ripped off by Golden State. That's it. So by approving it, you're going to just further encourage it. And it's unconscionable that you're doing that. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker.
Bill Miley, North Signal Street. I support an extension of the well drilling moratorium. And my logic was that new wells, even though in the permit might indicate that they were going to pull 1 to 2 acre feet, there's nothing to prevent them from pulling more. We have no extraction ordinance in this valley. And I was, so talking to a couple of my colleagues, I'm convinced maybe there's another issue that the council should consider. And leading up to that, I was trying to look on the Casitas website, and they have a policy that kicks in as the lake goes down. At some point, they stop giving will serve letters when the lake gets a certain level. And I couldn't find what it was, but I think it's there. Okay. So I would like to your council to consider the possibility of a moratorium on new water hookups within the city of Ojai through the Golden State water system. And here's the logic. According to Steve Wickstrum, he just said that Golden State is receiving about 30% of its water from Casitas. And thus 70% comes from the groundwater. So if there are new hookups within their system, they are likely to be pulling at least 70% of the new water from the ground. And that doesn't seem like a good way to go when we're faced with this interim problem. So I would hope that you would consider a moratorium on new hookups that would occur within the Golden State water system. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wanting to speak? No? I turn it back to council. And,
Mr. Baggerly, I'd like to.
Mr. Baggerly?
This is a little off point, but somebody mentioned that they'd been here for 5 years and they want to get rid of their newcomer moniker. I've been here for 38 years and people still think I'm a newcomer.
Thank you, Mr. Bag. Turning it back to council. Anybody else have a question? Yes, the councilman.
I don't have a question. I listened carefully to the comments, especially from Mr. McPherson and Mr. Miley, and I think there's other issues here, and but I think for right now we've got this particular issue to consider. There's other ones that definitely need to be looked at, but on this particular one, I think we have in effect, a partnership in this ordinance with OBGMA to quickly get a groundwater sustainability plan together. It's about implementing getting as quickly as possible into at least a submission of a plan. It's important to note that we're not talking about the state approving a plan, but the OBGMA submitting a plan. So it's under control of the people in this valley. And I just think that this is well crafted and makes sense to help OBGMA achieve this goal quickly.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, council member Clapp.
I think it's clear that this is good public policy, and I would like to move to adopt an urgency ordinance extending the moratorium on new well permits until October 28, 2015.
Second.
Roll call.
Ordinance number 849, an urgency ordinance of the City Council of the City of Ojai extending a moratorium on the issuance of permits for private water wells and establishing certain exceptions and procedures for waivers.
Yes. Roll
Do you
call.
want to say anything, Joe?
I remind the mayor just one more thing. We need to close the public hearing before we vote.
I'm closing the public hearing. Yes, Mr. McPherson.
Mine says 2015, and she just said 2016.
I said 15.
I'm sorry.
Oh, it
Okay.
just makes it. Okay. Roll call?
Blatz?
Yes.
Clapp?
Yes.
Weirick?
Yes.
Haney?
Yes.
Lara?
Yes.